Hey, how's it going? This is Roy from Rate My Funeral. Sorry. This is Roy from RateMyFuneral.com. That was rate, by the way. So, welcome along. Due to popular demand, well, at least a person said to me, please do some Cinema 4D tutorials again. So I thought, oh, right, fine. Like I say, it's been something I've been wanting to get back into, and I needed something fairly simple though. So let's go with motion blur basics. Okay, so this is something, I think it's a really important thing, and I think sometimes people don't even think about it, or it's lost, or whatever, I don't know. But whenever I see an animation that has no motion blur in it, it always makes me kind of like this. And it's because when you see something moving in front of your face like this, you will see motion blur. So if you do not simulate this, or whatever you're trying to make look real won't look real. It will look wrong. It will kind of be a bit stuttery and not quite sit right. So a little bit of motion blur is a really powerful thing. Now, obviously, you can go too far, you can go too much, or you can go not quite enough, obviously. But I really like, for example, the After Effects built-in motion blur. I think that's great. I don't understand why you wouldn't use it. Obviously, there's a personal taste element in there, but this is just me. So, and this is my video, and that's what I'm talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about. The point is that I am trying to make is that motion blur should be thought about. And there is a couple of ways to obviously incorporate it when you're working with Cinema 4D animations. The first one is that you do it inside of Cinema 4D using one of the built-in motion blur functions. The second is you do it in post using something inside of, say, for example, After Effects, maybe Final Cut. I'm not really a Mac user, so I don't know. So I'm working with After Effects anyway. So I thought we'd do a few little experiments and we'll go through the pros and cons of motion blur in the two different methods. So let's start quite simply by hopping on into Cinema and seeing where to begin. Okay, so let's begin somewhere near the start. So I could have made everything up already, but I don't think that's much fun. Let's actually build stuff here. Also, I might as well use stuff that I've already got just to make it that bit quicker. So if you're familiar with my stuff, you'll know about InVideo. We'll just use this for the floor because it's nice and easy. This is a lighting studio that's available on the website, but also RMF ball bag. So in ball bag, it's just various different sports balls. So we'll just use the basketball. Great example, perfect for what we want. It's just because everything is mostly set up. There's only minor tweaks we need to do just to make this into a useful scene for what we're doing. So the InVideo gives us our floor that's already got the dynamics configured and the ball is already. We just need to tweak a little. So inside of my basketball physics tag, I'm just going to go to custom initial velocity and stick 400. And then that way that's sort of being pushed along, and then we'll also give it some rotation so it at least looks like it's spinning. None of this is really necessary for what we're covering today. I just like it. I love the physics system in this. I just think it's fantastic. So let's just get our camera somewhere that looks a bit interesting. We also, I never like the speed by default, so I'm just going to press Control D, go to Dynamics, and then put the timescale up to 120. And we need to tweak the bouncing a little bit. Yep, so inside of InVideo we can change the floor physics and we can pop those up a little bit just so it bounces a little bit better. There we go. Obviously all of this you can do with any physics tag and all of this. It's just the idea is that InVideo and all the stuff that you need to tweak is right there. So that's the only reason for this. So hopefully this has now created a nice little loop so we can get an idea. Let's just zoom in a little bit more so that it makes a fluid. There we go. So this will be perfect for looking at how the different motion blurs affect. What I will also do is press Control D again and go to cache and bake that simulation. So that way I can now move this around. If we hit render, we can see it looks pretty good and it renders out pretty quickly. But I am a massive fan of ambient occlusion and I must turn that on if I'm ever doing anything, just so that we get a little bit darker shadow there. Just looks so much better. And also, do you know what? For no reason other than for fun, I'm going to turn on the reflective floor and let's have a quick look. Yeah, then that just looks that little bit cooler. It doesn't really impact the render time that much, so it's pretty quick. So obviously, yeah, that's that bit done. And now we need to set our render settings. So let's come into here. The output, we'll do it in good old fashioned 1080. 30 frames a second is absolutely fine. And we just need to say where we're going to put it. So we'll do it as a PNG sequence. And We'll pop it in here in a new folder. We'll call this one flat because we won't add any motion blur stuff to it at all. Okay, something like that. It doesn't matter really. And then that's that. So now we can hit render and let that do its thing. Let's have a look, see. So yeah, it shouldn't take too long. Oh, did you spot the mistake? That's right, silly Rory. Under output, I didn't change the frame range from current frame to all frames. We must do that so that it doesn't just do one frame. Right, let's hit render again. Okay, so yeah, if I had just done a blank scene with a ball and a flat plane, it would render out almost instantly. But like I say, I like things to look kind of smart while I'm working on them. So I'm just going to let this sit and do its thing. Maybe I'll speed it up for the video. I'll tell you what we could do while we're here. So just quickly, while this is doing this, I thought I'll just show you this because this is really cool. If you haven't seen this, it's on my website. It's a little piece of software that was written for me by a good friend of mine called Adam. He runs a YouTube channel called iNimbleSloth, so I recommend check that out. Stick it in the search, iNimbleSloth, and you can see various things. I'll tell you what, hang on. Let's just quickly bring this up for him. This is his channel. He does like retro computing stuff. So he's building Spectrums and he's building Commodore 64s and so on. And he does some like Let's Plays of some old classic games and stuff. It's quite fun. It's a good channel. So just check that out. But either way, he made this and this is available on my website, ratemyfuneral.com. And it's just a little tool that helps you work out how long things are going to take. So what you do is you put in your render time per frame. So we're going to say, so currently taking around about 3 seconds. So 0.3. And the number of frames we're going to do is 90. Calc my render. So it's going to tell me it's going to take around about 4 minutes 30 seconds to do the whole thing. So that's cool. Now if we take 42 off this and we just say that there's say another, I don't know, 45 frames to go, it lets me know that there's just 2 minutes to go till it's finished. So it's just a handy little tool if you want to get an idea of how much longer it should approximately take to finish your render, and it's completely free. So yeah, I just thought I'd mention that while this is going. Let's go back to the speediness. Okay, so my flat one has rendered out, and if we hit play on this, we can see that that's moving like that, and wonderful, superb. So no motion blur. We can kind of see that if we can freeze it at any point, and it looks like a still image, be it a rather sexy looking still image of a basketball on a white floor. But anyway, so that's okay. That is what it is. So let's try something else. Now we've got a couple of options. One is we can actually go into here in effect and we can do a subframe motion blur. And this will basically render through sort of 16 times extra per frame to work it out. This is really, really slow for rendering. So I never ever use this one. It's there may be a way to use it well, but to me it just absolutely kills the render time. So this one is not much good. So I would often go to physical, and now with the physical renderer, we can now go into physical here. And there is this option here for motion blur. Now, generally, these default settings are absolutely fine. I'll just change this to adaptive medium, just so it looks half decent. But this kind of, it should be absolutely fine. So let's just save this. We'll go in, we'll change our, where we're going to save it. So we'll call this one the physical motion blur. What the heck is that spelling all about? Oh, that'll do. Right, let's just run that through. Let's just do a quick test. For the sake of the video, let's maybe make this low. Yeah, that'll be a bit quicker and it doesn't really look that much different. So let's go. Okay, so please cache dynamic simulations when rendering motion blur. So we've already done that, so that's fine. We're already at there. So let's let that go through and do its thing. So we know that this the first one took around about it tells us there, look, 5 minutes and 43 seconds to render that whole one out. This one we can see we're getting 5 seconds a frame or at the moment, but obviously the ball's not fully out, and we can already see that there's a massive difference with the way the ball looks. So it's lost that sharpness. and so on. So let's just let the ball get out a little bit further. I think it's still saying about 5 minutes. 6. So I reckon we'll be looking at 6 seconds a frame once the thing's fully out. So let's just quickly pop that in here. 6, and there's going to be 90 frames. So in total, it should take somewhere around about 9 minutes. So there, let's speed that one up and see what it does. Okay, so that's pretty much there. Now, as you may or may not have noticed, that's taken 10 minutes. So the Calcomai render was pretty much spot on. It was a few seconds out, but yeah, the thing with this one, see, now this looks to me so much better. It just looks much more realistic. If we look at it in this one, it's just not right. Something's not right to look at. So this is why I always think it's super important to have some form of motion blur on there. Now obviously it's grainy and horrid, but that's because we chose low. Kind of wish I'd chosen higher, but that would have just taken longer, that's all. So yeah, so we can really see a difference in just the way that looks. Now the downside obviously is the render time was slower. So now how can we get around this in another way? Well, of course there is another option, which is that we add it in post. So let me just launch up After Effects. Okay, so now that we're in here, we can actually, let's import our footage. And we'll grab the flat one and we'll import it as a PNG sequence, and we'll just go ahead, make a composition out of it. It's fine. There's nothing really to do specifically, but let's put that into the buffer. So there we go. We can see that now doing its thing. And it's got that same kind of jitteriness that just doesn't look quite right, even though it wasn't quite real time. I'm not sure why this is struggling with this so much. We can now do it using, if we go into effects and do motion, there's one here called Pixel Motion Blur, and this will add the motion blur to it. And there's some settings up here. We can put up the shutter angle, which will basically make it much more blurry, and we can put up the samples, which will just give it sort of a lot more to think about when it does it. Pretty much I just use this as standard whenever I use it. And now if we compare this one, we can see that that's actually, it's doing the job quite well. Just let that run through. Boom, there we go. And there we go. So we've now managed to match kind of what the other one looked like. Let's bring the other one in actually. Let's do it like that. So we can see the two side by side. Well, let's just run this. So this was this one. Now the one thing you can see is that it just does look that little bit more convincing, and that's where the time went. But if we can then compare it with this one, this you can get away with most of the time. So this is a really great way to get motion blur into your projects. Now there is a tool from Trapcode called Real Smart Motion Blur, which gives you a little bit more, well, quite a bit more control than the Pixel Motion Blur. So if this isn't good enough for you, that is an option, but it is quite expensive. It's a paid plugin. You may not want to go down that route depending on how often you use it. So like I say, I find that this one does the job perfectly, and a good majority of the time I'll actually just do it as part of the render. But there is something I wanted to add here. There is a reason why you would use one over the other specifically, and that is if you've got a very complicated scene with lots of things. You may have seen some of my animations where there's lots and lots of cubes flying around or whatever. That makes a massive difference there, because this one that uses the pixel motion blur, it does it, obviously it calculates the pixels and then tries to add some pixels to make it up. What this can cause is artifacts on other items in the scene. So if there are other things that aren't moving, then sometimes you'll get kind of like a scrapey blur going across it. And that is where this one comes in, because this one won't cause that, because it's being worked out on the thing that's actually moving, so it will work properly. So I'm going to quickly set up an example of that if I can. Okay, so I went ahead and made a much more over-the-top ridiculous scene for this one, and it's basically, you'll see there's a bunch of cubes that fall down and hit the house. And there we go. So we just need to do a few tweaks. So we'll make it 200 frames. And we will, I'll show you what it actually is as well. It's just a bit silly, but basically there's just a big load of cubes here inside of a cloner object, and I've made a kind of funnel above the house that's just out of the shot, so that when it all starts falling down, it all falls all over the house. Now, a couple of little tweaks just to make life a little bit better in general. I'm going to start there. So again, this is nothing to do with it. I'm just playing, and I don't know, I'm having fun. I don't know if you are. I hope you are. So I'm going to hit play, and just before they start all falling out, at that point, I'm going to go into my cube that's inside the clone and say set initial state. So that way, when I start the scene, that's where they actually start. So then they'll start pouring out sort of straight away. So we can get down here with our camera, and we can maybe shorten the scene just a little bit. Great. Superb. Right, so let's do 160 frames. There we go. We'll shorten it a little bit. And then the next thing we'll do is we'll bake that in. So we'll bake it. I've put the quality of the physical renderer up a little bit, but let's just hit render here. Now, obviously, there's a lot more going on, so this will take a little bit longer. But now that this is all baked in, I can actually go into these cubes and fillet them, and just maybe give them like a number 2, not 5, but 3. And then just makes those look that little bit better. Because it gives them a bit of light to reflect off and stuff. So we've got this cool kind of interesting white scene going on here, and yeah, that's pretty nifty. Yeah, that's going to take a little while to render out, but that should look pretty cool once that's done. And I'm really hoping that this does actually demonstrate the point that I'm making, because I'm going to so much effort that I probably shouldn't be, and then discover it makes no odds. But yeah, let's set this rendering out. I'm going to reduce the resolution of this one a little bit, just so it does go that little bit quicker. So I'm going to do half HD. That was H, by the way. Something like that, whatever. It doesn't really matter. So physical, like I say, I changed that to medium. I'm going to leave these as they are. Basically, hair subdivisions obviously doesn't really matter. Deformation doesn't really matter. It's the motion ones. And basically, the higher that number, the more times it will run through and give you a better quality blur. And like I say, I've always found that 4 is fine. It's absolutely fine for what I'm doing. Right, let's set that going. Okay, now this is kind of tricky to tell at this stage. I'm just going to calc my render. Okay, so 13 seconds. Oh, wow, hang on, is this right? Something didn't seem right there. The fact that they've all just suddenly appeared. Now it seems to have frozen. They've come through like ghosts. Okay, this is strange. I don't actually understand why it stuck that one frame with lots of cubes there. There's maybe either something I've done wrong or maybe a bug or something, but now suddenly we're doing it normally again. Could be related to that. Please make sure you bake. But to be fair, if it now continues as normal, it shouldn't really cause a problem. Let me just double check. Again, this is not, well, I suppose this is. So we're looking at frame 10, 11 before we actually see a cube fall in. Okay, so they seem okay now. It's just that one frame is really strange. But okay. So at a guess that all of those took 54 seconds, and then now they're taking 14 frames a second. 14 seconds to do a frame. It's really difficult to gauge this, but we're looking at, so let's just say it takes 30 seconds and our first frame is 0 and our last frame is 160. I realized when I showed you this before, I showed you an older version. We changed this. So Adam added this extra bit so that, instead of just putting in the number of frames, he put a start frame and an end frame. So that way, because we're already on frame 9, we can do that, you see. And it's telling me it should be around about an hour. I didn't realize it was going to take that long. I probably should have left it on low. There's our first one, and sure enough, we're on frame 11 now. So okay, no, this is doing what it should. I am going to not make you sit through it. So let's use the magic of editing to get to the end of this render. Okay, so now let's do another version of it, but in the standard renderer. So just in standard renderer, all the settings as default, whatever, and let's just set that one going. Hopefully this one should actually render out a little bit quicker. Okay, groovy, that is both of them. Now, let's first of all have a look. So the difference between doing it in the standard renderer with no motion blur was that whole scene took 10 minutes to render. With the physical one, you can see there that took 1 hour and 28 minutes, so quite a considerable difference in speed. And now if you look at the difference, now in the standard one, I do have anti-aliasing turned to geometry, so that is a massive factor. You wouldn't want to really render your final video in that, so that would add a bit of time. But overall, I mean, in this basic scene, you can't see a huge amount of difference. Now, where you can see the difference, and this is where all that time's gone, is if we run the flat one first. So looks great, all the cubes are bouncing around and all the movement's all nice and all of that, and yeah, great, super. However, it's still got this kind of, it just doesn't feel quite right. Now look at it on here. Suddenly that now looks realistic, and that feels like something that you could actually imagine happening, with the exception of that strange first frame that you would have to remove in post. I'm not sure where that comes from, but this looks fantastic like that. So this is where you get that. Now, so let's pop into After Effects, and we'll import those two videos. Okay, so now we have our flat version, and we also have our other version with our strange single frame. So let's use our flat version, and we'll do the same thing as we did with that basketball, where we put the pixel motion blur on it, and we can see it's doing its business. Let's get that into the RAM. Okay, so now when we watch it, at first watch, that looks absolutely fine. It looks, yep. So we could have had that in 10 minutes rather than the other one in an hour and a half. But let's actually get in there, have a bit of a closer look and see if we can see what the problems are. When we get closer, we can now see, look, you start getting all these very strange looking After Effects artifacts. You can see here the window starts to change before the stuff's arrived, and that's because of the way the shadows are moving across this. And the motion blur plugin is trying to work out, you know, what pixels should be moving, and it's obviously getting a bit confused between what is these shadows and the background. So you end up with a lot of this kind of messiness. And again, we zoom in on this one and we look at the same thing, and you'll see that there's none of that, because obviously it's calculated properly from the source. So this is the you know, it is a big difference, and there's certain scenes that you'll do where that will really stand out. I mean, you can see that those windows look very strange indeed. So this is the reason why you've got a couple of different options here, and I do a mixture all the time. I do a mixture. So if I've got a scene where, you know, I've got all of this going on, then I'll do that with, most likely I will do that with the physical renderer, and I will let it take the longer. You know, that would be the sacrifice. However, if I could somehow splice the two together, you know, if I was doing something that was using this one, then using the motion blur plugin, absolutely fine, no problem at all. But then as soon as I'm switching over to this one, this is when I want to change it and do it with the inbuilt stuff. Again, you can do a lot of things with you can do things with masking to stop it from doing that, but then you're just adding yourself a ton more time. This is just my way of thinking about it. So there's your couple of options that you've got when it comes to motion blur. So yeah, so like I say, it's very, very minor details, but this might make a difference. So as you can see, the one with no motion blur, it's kind of stuttery. The one with the plug-in motion blur, it's okay, it looks fine, it looks perfect. And the one with the physical motion blur, again, I would be hard pushed to tell a difference between these bottom two, in all honesty. So for this particular example, either will work. Doesn't really matter. It's down to the speed of the render or whatever. Now with this one, as we covered, this is much more important. Here we can see that this one just doesn't look very nice at all in the terms of the way the blocks are moving. This one down here looks okay, but we can see some kind of strange artifacts and some strange movement around the shadows. And this one down here looks spot on. Now, obviously this one took so much more longer to render, but this is the difference. This is what you get, at least in this case anyway. So now, while there are other methods of going about this, these are the ones that I usually use. I either go with the plugin inside of After Effects, or I'll put it in physical, depending on how much. If it's just a simple single thing that's moving, then the plugin is normally fine. If you've got lots in a complex scene, then the physical renderer will look a lot better, but you will have to sacrifice that render time. So hopefully this has given you some things to think about, and yeah, it was quite a fun way to get back into things. I really enjoyed this. So remember, if you like the look of Infidio or Ball Bag, Both of these are available from the website writemyfuneral.com. Remember to check out I Nibble Sloth's YouTube channel. That's really interesting. And of course, if you want to check out any of my other videos, there's plenty here. If you're not subscribed already, I would really appreciate it. Hit that and then you can see when I put a new video up. Hit that little bell and it'll actually tell you he's put a video up. My God! And also, yeah, leave a comment and so on and all of that normal nonsense. And yeah, I really hope to see you in the next video. So thanks very much. Ciao for now.